in Florida, where Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had an unannounced meeting with Donald Trump last night. Trudeau flew to Palm Beach to meet with the president-elect amid the threat of sweeping tariffs on Canadian exports into the U.S. The two dined at Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate, along with the public safety minister, Dominic LeBlanc, and a handful of Trump's cabinet nominees. The surprise visit came just hours after a news conference on Prince Edward Island, where Trudeau said Trump's tariff threats should be taken seriously. Economists say the proposed 25% tariff would be a devastating blow to Canada's economy. CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian joins us now for more on this surprise visit by Trudeau. So, Rafi, what can you tell us about what happened at this dinner with Donald Trump?
Jacqueline, it appears there will be no official statement from either side about the visit, but we are hearing in bits and pieces from Canadian sources that it was overall positive, that the dinner lasted some 3 hours, that there were some key connections made between Prime Minister Trudeau, his Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc, and some of these nominees to cabinet positions that Donald Trump has proposed, such as his Commerce Secretary, his National Security Advisor. We know that a number of subjects important to both sides came up: migration, the fentanyl smuggling through to the United States. Both of these were cited by Trump as a reason to impose those tariffs on Canada. And we have heard a little bit from the Prime Minister himself. Journalists caught him as he was leaving his hotel this morning. Have a listen.
Prime Minister, was it a productive meeting with President-elect?
It was an excellent conversation.
How are you talking about your dealings with Donald Trump?
Something else that came up is the talk of energy, Keystone XL, that pipeline project that was killed by Democrat President Joe Biden in January 2021. That was raised apparently by Justin Trudeau himself to Donald Trump. This is what we're hearing from one source who was privy to the conversation. We're not entirely sure how Trump reacted to that. Yet we do know that the tariffs issue was something clearly on Justin Trudeau's mind. As you said yourself, he brought that up in Prince Edward Island when speaking to journalists earlier on Friday, hours before the trip.
Donald Trump, when he makes statements like that, he plans on carrying them out. There's no question about it. Our responsibility is to point out that in this way, he would be actually not just harming Canadians who work so well with the United States, he'd actually be raising prices for American citizens as well.
So probably the first of many conversations the Prime Minister is hoping to have with the incoming administration on this.
Yeah, Rafi, I mean, the big question here is, did this do anything, right? When it comes to that tariff threat, what are you hearing on that?
Okay, so we have one source telling us that they're viewing this as a good start on the topic of trying to deflate this threat of tariffs, but that the Canadian side, has not gotten Trump to go back on his word. And again, I will caution that what we're hearing about, the meeting being positive and all that is coming to us from the Canadian side of things largely. We don't have a sense yet of how the U.S. Is viewing this, or how I should say Donald Trump's incoming administration, his circle, is viewing this. We do know that one of his folks at the table commented on Twitter or X rather, and said that it was indeed a very interesting meeting, but we don't have anything beyond that. It was, if you talk to economists here, if you talk to political scientists, this was an important move by Trudeau, just showing that he's trying to do something about this. We have a clip from a political scientist on the matter.
In terms of strategy, I think it makes sense for the Prime Minister to do this. Trump is notoriously insecure about his standing, his relations with other world leaders. And so I think this sort of flattery is a very smart play on the part of the Prime Minister.
We're also starting to see some political reaction on this side of the border. Yves-François Blanchet, the leader of the Bloc Québécois, is the first federal opposition leader to issue a statement. We've translated that and are putting it on your screen. He said, "You can't fault the Prime Minister for going to meet the USA's president-elect while the latter is starting the next round of trade negotiations in an intimidating way and setting partial conditions regarding border control." He goes on to say that Quebec and Canada have to show the USA how important they are to its economy and foresee changes to the CUSMA. It is, however, a bit late for Mr. Trudeau to start acting responsibly. Finally, Blanchet also says, "We'll collaborate if it's good for Quebec and support the request for a Quebec negotiator at the table." Now, that last bit, Jacqueline, is a reference to how the Quebec provincial government has asked to have a representative on Team Canada when negotiating with Trump. The provinces, of course, are very seized with this tariff threat by the incoming president. They asked for an emergency meeting with Trudeau about it this week, and they got one, and the Prime Minister has said, or his government has said, that they will keep talking to premiers about the incoming administration.
Okay, Rafi, appreciate the latest reaction on that. That's Rafi Boudjikanian for us. Let's dig a little deeper into this. We're joined now by John Ibbitson in Ottawa. He's a writer at the Globe and Mail. John, thank you so much for making time for us today.
My pleasure.
So you wrote earlier this week that the Prime Minister has no higher priority than heading off this tariff threat. What do you make of this visit, of meeting Trump face to face? Is that enough of, making it a priority, do you think?
Well, certainly in the first week, Mr. Trudeau hasn't put a foot wrong. There is no other issue for this government between now and the inauguration on the 20th of January, other than the issue of getting the tariffs suspended, at least until some kind of negotiation can take place. So Mr. Trudeau has made it perfectly clear that he agrees. He had the first minister's meeting last week. He went down personally to Mar-a-Lago to meet and have dinner with Mr. Trump yesterday. He is signaling to the Americans, as well as to the Canadians, to the premiers, the opposition parties, that this is indeed the most important file on his desk. So, yeah, a good first week. A long way to go before we have the actual suspension of the tariffs before the inauguration, but at least it's a good start.
What do you think happened at this meeting? And I know it's purely just guessing, other than what we know about the topics and whatnot. But I mean, I just imagine it being such a tricky thing to navigate because, yes, you want to be a bit aggressive on the tariff situation, but maybe not at this particular dinner. You want to be able to talk about all of those topics, but in a way that's still social and you're still trying to build relationships. How do you think, Trudeau would have been navigating that?
Well, look, you do not sit down to dinner with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago and have 3 hours of intense, focused negotiations. Here is item 4 on the agenda. Here is item 5. Mm-hmm. He's not like that. Trudeau went and sat at the table and listened to Donald Trump talk for 3 hours. He probably tried to get a word in here and there, but mostly he was just there to sit and eat the steak, most likely, and hear Mr. Trump talk. Of course, what was going on the sidelines is even more important. What were his aides doing with their aides? What were our Dominic LeBlanc doing with his counterparts? The conversations around the dinner will be what matter. How did we set in place a process to discuss the question of the tariffs, of responding to them, of border security, of meeting American demands, of protecting Canadian interests? That all happens well away from the dinner table. The dinner table is important because there's a tense relationship between Donald Trump and Justin Trudeau over the NAFTA negotiations, over the G7 in the first term. Mr. Trump was quite insulting to Mr. Trudeau. This is Mr. Trudeau saying, let's bygones be bygones, let's have a glass of wine, let's have a well-done steak, and let's talk to each other as leader to leader. Yeah,
so how do you think Trump would have received this visit? I mean, if it went the way that perhaps you're thinking that it did. Trudeau showed up. He socialized with him. He spent some time with him. How How do you think that might change his thoughts around Trudeau, perhaps? You know, as you're mentioning, the tension that existed between them the first time around.
Well, Mr. Trump likes to have his ego stroked. So Justin coming down from Canada to have dinner with me at Mar-a-Lago and plead not to be the victim of the tariffs that I'm threatening to impose upon him is just the kind of thing that he would love. But that's all right. We have to get on the right side of this man. He's going to be the president for the next 4 years, and he represents a great threat to Canada's interests. But there are things that we can do on the border, on drug trade, especially on national defense, where we can make real progress. I think if Donald Trump thinks that Justin Trudeau is a good guy to work with right now, that might go some distance to allaying the fact that Mr. Trudeau is, in fact, a badly crippled, lame duck prime minister. The Americans know that he's 20 points behind in the poll. The Americans know that there's going to be an election possibly in the spring, certainly in the fall, and that he's most likely to be defeated and replaced by Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. We are approaching these negotiations at a time of real political vulnerability, sort of in between administrations, as it were. But we've got to do it. If Justin Trudeau does not want to step down, if he does not want to call an election, if he insists on taking the negotiations through to the inauguration, then this is the way it gets done.
John, we heard our reporter Rafi there talking about a senior Canadian source that said when it comes to, you know, whether this meeting did move the ball on tariffs, it's a start. You mentioned that this could be one of many meetings. How do you think this plays out in a way where, you know, this tariff threat does go away before inauguration? Do you think that that's a possibility?
It's a necessity. If those tariffs are put in place on January 20, the Canadian economy craters on January 21. So there are going to be intense negotiations between now and then. The time is frighteningly short. We're already into December tomorrow. We have the Christmas holiday season, though there won't be much holidaying, I think, on the Canadian side especially. But I don't know, by the way, who the lead person is in the negotiations. Chrystia Freeland, then Foreign Minister, and Bill Morneau, then Finance Minister, took the lead mostly in those negotiations, though there were tensions between those two. What is the team that's going to be negotiating between now and the 20th of December? Which are the senior ministers who are going to be leading the file? And yes, we have to have the premiers of the provinces sitting in the next room, being fully informed and consulted at all times. There's a lot that can go wrong. There's a lot. You can have a bad conversation. You can have things going off the rails. It's a very dangerous situation, but it has to take place mostly in back rooms, mostly by negotiators, both within the Prime Minister's office and at finance and at international trade and at border security agencies. That all has to take place on the sidelines. And then, please God, several days before the 20th of January, Mr. Trump announces that he will suspend the tariffs for a 6-month period to allow those negotiations to continue. That's not a good scenario, but that is the very best case scenario.
John, a lot that could go wrong, and a short time, like you said, to figure it out within. Really appreciate you joining us today, John. Thanks for your time.
My pleasure.
That's John Ibbitson.